days at a time, to the point that I would hallucinate. Decades passed before I looked back and I thought to myself, that wasn't really typical behavior. The first time I was hospitalized for my mental health was after chatting with an acquaintance. And apparently I said more to a stranger than most people would at that particular time. I didn't know he was a psychiatrist. He determined from my conversation that I was suicidal and had some friends rush me immediately to the hospital. At the hospital, I was diagnosed with depression, and I was held at Cedars-Sinai for 7 days. When my week was over, I was expecting to be released when my doctor came and told me that he could not release me. The reason was that they couldn't find a county clinic that had the availability to take me in as a client. Having no insurance, I'd already experienced being turned away from the county clinics. I told him he was going to have a difficult time finding one. I was correct. After a total of 10 days, I was told a clinic was available and I was sent home. I lived in Hollywood at that particular time, and the clinic that they found for me was at the other end of the San Fernando Valley. It was a 3-hour bus ride each way. The process, I used to change the microphone up here. The process of receiving therapy from this clinic was disheartening. I was brought in by an intern. She had a booklet that she would tell her to ask questions. When I would respond, she would then turn to the appropriate page to ask the next question. When she finished, she excused herself and she left the room. And apparently, my responses took me to all the right pages, because she did return with a prescription for antidepressants. Now, although the prescription was signed by a doctor, I was never given the opportunity to speak with one. I continued to try and get into other clinics, but was consistently told no. In fact, because I had already been assigned a clinic, they wouldn't even consider putting me on a wait list. Eventually, I stopped going on my long bus excursions. I don't recall it being a conscious decision. This is common amongst those with mood disorders and other forms of mental illness. After taking the proper medication for a while, we start feeling better and we stop taking our medication. Why continue to take them when we feel so good? And most of us at the end end up bottoming out again and end up right back into the system trying to get help. Now, our country does not have a good track record for treating the mentally ill. North America's first public mental health hospital opened in 1773 in Williamsburg, Virginia, named, let me get it here, the Public Hospital for Persons of Insane and Disordered Minds. Try and say that one 5 times real fast. The treatments given at this facility were nothing short of torture. One procedure involved submerging the patients into ice baths until they lost their consciousness. One way of expelling the illness from the patients was to induce vomiting. And of course, there was bleeding. Bleeding was used commonly for many types of ailments at that time, but unfortunately in the mental institutions, it usually resulted in death. Now, although the colonial era's methods of handling the mentally ill are considered barbaric by today's standards, most people at that time were content because the mentally ill were out of sight. Not much changed for over 50 years until one woman helped to make sweeping changes across the nation. Born in 1802, Dorothea Dix was the first child of an impoverished family. Her father was a Methodist preacher who was an abusive alcoholic. Her mother struggled with depression and suffered from acute headaches. As a distributor of religious pamphlets promoting the hellfire and brimstone theology, he continually moved his family from place to place. As a child, Dorothea was required to stitch and paste these small pamphlets together for long hours. Feeling abused, she ran away when she was 12 to live with her grandmother in Boston. One of my biggest concerns today is my morning medications make me very dry. So, Dorothea began her religious life as a Methodist. When she moved in with her grandmother, she attended the Congregational Church with her. She was not satisfied with either religion. She decided to attend the Unitarian Church service and quickly became friends with William Ellery Channing, who who was the foremost Unitarian minister at that time. In his teachings, she did not hear of Jesus who died on the cross to save her from an eternity in hell. Instead, she learned of a Jesus who lived a life of love and compassion and called upon all people to do the same. Dorothea became a Unitarian. In 1841, Dorothea was asked to lead a Bible study class for women at the Cambridge House of Corrections. It was there that she discovered the mentally ill were unclothed, in chains, and were being thrown into prisons with criminals who were in unheated, unfurnished, and foul-smelling cells. When she asked why the jail was in these conditions, she was told, "Those people were mentally ill. They don't understand anyway." And that became the defining moment in her life, and the cause that she would spend the rest of the remaining years of her life. She carefully prepared and took the case to the state legislature, where she won support for the expansion of the Worcester State Hospital. Once she had succeeded in Massachusetts, she traveled to other states and proceeded doing the same process. Although her health was poor, she managed to cover every state east of the Mississippi River. Before her death in 1887, Dorothea had helped to found 47 mental hospitals. Talk about faith in action here. Their treatment methods at these hospitals, were still crude by today's standards. However, they were remarkable steps forward in the mid-1800s. Upon her death, more institutions were built and other advancements were made, especially in medicine, but no sweeping changes would take place for another 80 years. It was in 1963 that President Kennedy delivered a speech to Congress where he proposed a national mental health program to assist in the inauguration of a wholly new emphasis and approach to care for the mentally ill. Central to a new health program is comprehensive community care. The states have depended on hospitals and homes, shamefully understaffed, overcrowded, unpleasant institutions from which death too often provided the only firm release of hope. Deinstitutionalization drew enthusiastic support from fiscal conservatives because they believed that mental health patients needed to be, because they were interested in saving funds from shutting state hospitals. Civil rights advocates, however, were enthusiastic because they believed that the mental patients needed to be liberated. The Community Mental Health Centers Act was the last law President Kennedy signed before his assassination. Liberty unchecked can come at a heavy price. The federal grants promised to the states for community health clinics barely materialized. Deinstitutionalization was and is a well-intended disaster. Many patients and institutions were released into the community. However, most communities did not have the facilities to deal with them, and in many cases, patients wound up homeless or in jails. Currently, throughout the United States, there are 3 times more individuals with serious mental illnesses in jails and in prisons than in hospitals. Los Angeles Sheriff Lee Baca once said, "I run the biggest mental hospital in the country." The good works by Dorothea Dix have gone full circle. Now, after my stay at Cedars-Sinai, I was able to function as a productive member of society for a good number of years. Then suddenly, without warning, I began to fall apart again. This time it was different. Yes, I frequently felt depressed. However, my erratic behavior came back and was much stronger. As a result, I lost my job, I lost my insurance, and I began having seizures and I became agoraphobic. Once again, I called the county mental health line and was asked where I could seek help. The clerk on the other end of the line told me where I could go and then gave me the following warning. Keep in mind that the county clinics are struggling for funding, so the primary function of those who work in admissions is not to admit you. He then proceeded with this advice. When you get there, you need to put on a good show and convince them you will kill yourself if you don't get in. Apparently, I am not a master thespian because I did not make the cut. They refused to admit me because I was too high functioning. Now again, I'd lost a job, lost my insurance, near homeless, but I was too high functioning. I did not feel high functioning. Clearly, preventative care is a low priority because when I was at the clinic, they told me when, not if, when you get worse, come back and we'll see if we can get you in. Preventative care is clearly not even part of the program. At this point, suicide was whirling on my brain on a regular basis. Then one day, a friend of mine became so concerned she gave me two options. I could call an ambulance and have them take me to the hospital where she would meet me, or I could call my husband Maurice and have him take me immediately. Not wanting to cause more drama, I called Maurice in a panic, and he came to my rescue. I was taken directly to the psych ward, handed a hospital gown and a blanket, and was shown a hard bench to lie on. Much later, a doctor woke me and sat down to speak with me. She told me she had been talking with Maurice and determined he was supportive enough that it was safe for me to go home. For the first time, I didn't ask for help. I demanded help. I refused to take no for an answer, and I told her I was not going anywhere. She was in shock. All I asked of her was a safe place to go and give the help I needed. I needed a guarantee. She walked away. After a grueling amount of time, she came back with a phone number. She assured me that if I called the number in the morning, I would get the help I needed. She was going to make sure of it. I was skeptical. How would I know I would get in? Should I demand to stay in the hospital until an appointment had already been made? That evening, I took a leap of faith and I left the hospital. The next day, I called the number and surprisingly, I had an appointment. This time it was not with an admissions person who would turn me away again. This time I was given an appointment with a real, honest-to-God doctor. It was at this clinic that I was accurately diagnosed as having bipolar disorder, otherwise known as manic depression. And therefore I began then to receive the proper treatment. Now, according to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, suicide is the third leading cause of death for American youths aged 15 to 24. Also, 1 in 17 adults lives with a serious mental illness like schizophrenia, major depression, or bipolar disorder. So what do we do? Well, for starters, as it's written, the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare, will allow more people to access to mental health care. It will also eliminate being disapproved due to pre-existing conditions. But that is far from enough. Thankfully, we have organizations such as the National Alliance on Mental Illness and other advocacy groups speaking on behalf of the mentally ill. But they can't do it on their own. Not until the public demands that mental health care be treated equally to physical care will there be any significant changes. Some of you may find it odd how open I am regarding my mental illness. I even blog about it, as Kim said, on a daily basis. Coming out of the mental health closet was a scary, conscious decision. And I want to quote newscaster Jane Pauley, who is also living with bipolar disorder. And Jane said, "A diagnosis is burden enough without being burdened by secrecy and shame." My decision to be open and honest about my mental health was easier by all of you, a loving and caring congregation. Many of you gave me rides. In fact, two that I'm looking at right now, both Peggy Boyd and Sue Cutler, spent many hours waiting for me in their cars for my doctor's appointments. But I do thank you all. Now, despite my struggle to get help, I am one of the lucky ones. I think of those who have no support system. I think of those who have fallen through the cracks. And most of all, I think of the 1 in 5 people who are bipolar who successfully commit suicide. I think of them nearly every day. Amen.